The Consumer Bankers Association is pleased to welcome you to today's webinar From Insight to Impact, How Decision Intelligence is Redefining Retail Banking Growth, presented by Curinos. My name is Isabella. It is my pleasure to facilitate today's event. Thank you for joining. Please note we are recording and all participant lines are muted. If you have any trouble, please email conferences@consumerbankers.com or send a message in the Q&A box. This presentation will last up to 60 minutes and will include question and answer opportunities at the end. You may submit a question at any time by entering the questions into the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. As a reminder, the views expressed in this webinar are those of the presenters and do not represent the views of CBA or its members. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Sarah Welch, Managing Director, Product at Curinos, and Ollie Downs, Chief Technology, Product, and AI Officer at Curinos. Sarah and Ollie, welcome.
Thank you so much, Isabel. It's great to be here. We have, I think, quite a bit of really good stuff to get through during our conversation today. And just on the next slide, you can see sort of what we're gonna, actually, the next slide, you can see what we're gonna cover. So we're gonna start with a particular challenge that banks are facing today, right? And the playbook that was working is no longer necessarily working. There are a lot of aspects about it that are breaking. And then we'll talk a little bit about coordinated customer-centric approaches that can work and what those look like in practice. And then some of the results we're seeing from banks who have made the shift to that. So with that, let's dive into the next slide, which really kind of brings to the forefront the squeeze that retail banks are facing right now. And on paper, these things may look like kind of separate problems on the surface, but they're actually one problem in three different forms, and they kind of compound one on top of the other on top of the other. The first problem is that portfolios are bleeding. Balance attrition is running about 25% higher than it did in 2019. So that is a pain point, right? Customers are sort of bleeding away and giving you less of their wallets. They haven't left necessarily. They're just sort of quietly moving things elsewhere. The second in the middle is acquisition is getting absolutely brutally expensive. The average cost to acquire a new checking account customer hit $559 in 2025. That's more than double where it was in 2018. And this is the average, right? So some are paying significantly more than this 559. And this is coming out of cross-bank benchmark that we have around the sort of state of customer acquisition, what banks are spending to actually acquire customer accounts. The third piece is coming out of our annual shopper study, which is looking at how are switchers making decisions and sort of what's true about them. And this was an eye-popping one, sort of in 2019, 7% of the switcher population answered the question, I have more than 4+ checking accounts in the affirmative. Today, it's 50%. So back to the first point where you have, customers you've already won giving you less of their wallet every year. You have customers you're just winning coming in with a much more fragmented wallet than they've ever had before. And so these three things are just, they feed on one another. When attrition rises, you have to have more acquisition to bring more in to just stand still. And when that gets expensive, you need higher value customers to make the unit economics work. And when wallets fragment, the customers you do acquire are bringing you kind of less. And this is something on some level you can't outspend, right? The math doesn't math. And what you're faced with is, gosh, we have to grow differently here. And so that's really the reality that we're facing. So if you jump to the next slide, we can see the outcomes of a little bit of those headwinds. So this is what, in effect, the math, it's not really mathing, that we talked about on the previous slide, looks like on an industry-wide basis. So the dots here are financial institutions. The horizontal axis is net checking customer growth, and the vertical axis is total deposit growth. Now, most banks are going to set a target to grow around 3% on both of these axes. So you want to be in that upper right quadrant. That's sort of the place you want to be. But only 10% of banks are actually hitting that target. There are many banks that are growing deposits, but maybe paying for their nose for those deposits. And the sort of a lot of the banks are in effect losing ground on both deposits and households. And if you're somewhere in the middle of the chart, a lot of banks are there. The sort of main point there is that the gap between the top decile and everybody else is widening, and the banks that are pulling away here and are able to actually grow both households and deposits at around that 3% clip are doing structurally different things. So this is the sort of conundrum writ large on an industry basis. So if we jump to the next slide, we actually have a question for you all. And that is, what is the kind of growth that you're targeting and optimizing for at your bank? Presuming many of you have CEOs that want both customers and balances. Are there departmental incentives pushing you in one direction or another? Can you pick the sort of answer here that's closest to your reality? My hunch is the answer is yes.
That's mine too, Sarah. Yes to all.
Feel like we need some music playing in the background while the poll goes. It never finishes quite fast enough for it not to be awkward. Here we come. So we have it looks like both, yes, is the answer. Yes, I want household growth and deposit growth. And that's the challenge. Accomplishing kind of both of those is difficult. All right. And then balances would be a strong second, which reflects what we just saw on the previous page in terms of data. So if we jump to the next slide, I think there's another structural force that's also contributing here to some of the struggle that we were just seeing on that growth chart previously. So if you look at the left panel first, the total acquisition has held kind of in a relatively flat and stable space over the past 3 years. What's changed is the mix. In 2023, branch acquisition was about 71% of new relationships. By 2025, that's down to 60%. So digital acquisition is something that's climbing quickly here, currently about 40%. And that shift looks neutral when we're just considering volume, right? But on value, that shift is anything but neutral. So if you look at the middle panel here, a relationship that is acquired in the branch has a much higher retention rate, so 75% retention after 12 months, compared to on only 41% retention rate for customers that are coming in through digital front doors. And even more concerning is what you see on the right-hand panel there, which is the branch acquired customers are carrying a much, much higher 10x, right? Average balance at month 12. The digital account openers are at, less than 4,000. So when you start stacking these numbers, a branch customer is worth roughly 7 times what a digital customer is at about a year in, 7 times. And the problem is digital is where customers want to be, right? When we ask customers how would they like to open a new account or open a new relationship with a new financial institution, like 90+% will say digitally, thank you very much. But the problem is when they come through those channels, we're not capturing the same kind of relationship that we capture when they're coming in through an intermediated kind of interaction in a branch. Whether we like it or not, this mix is absolutely going to keep shifting, right? Younger customers are definitely even more digital. Higher income customers, more digital, shifting more digital all the time. And switchers also skewing more digital over time. So if you're doing nothing, your mix is getting worse. So if we jump to the next slide, this is about kind of projecting that forward, right? And the number is maybe more eye-popping than you might realize. So if the digital mix continues to climb in the way that it's been climbing, let's say it hits 55% by the end of next year, and you want to retain this same dollar value of balances that you have today, you need 41% more customers. So that's a like chokingly large number, right? Most of the banks, as we saw in that earlier slide, are really not even growing new households or new customers at all, and many are shrinking. And the structural math of this sort of shift to digital is saying, gosh, you need 41% more, not just standing still. So the cost of inaction is very, very high. And the other piece of this is you're probably not going to be able to just outspend this problem, right? You can't outbranch this problem necessarily. This is a shift to digital that's pretty structural and permanent. And the question really is how do you change to acquire better and deepen better so that you're getting on that very first slide, so root cause of the acquisition challenge and the retention challenge kind of dealt with at the root rather than just sort of treating the symptoms. So how do I find customers that are going to be better customers for my bank, my institution, and how do I interact with those customers in a digital first way that has them bringing more balances, sticking with me longer, not fragmenting across a gazillion options because it's easy, but sticking with me because I know something about them and I'm treating them in a way that is relevant to them. So the math is stark, and standing still is really not an option. And the next slide, the tendency is, well, let's just go after the mass affluent that's going to solve the problems. And the question behind that question or behind that assertion is we want to get smarter, right? We want to bring in more balances, better relationships. But I think the real question is smarter how, right? So if you're looking at the chart on the left, this is taking a look at the average balance for new to bank customers segmented by age and by income, and the top performers compared to the bottom performers. And I think the thing that is super remarkable about this data is how consistent within each segment the performance is between the top performers and the bottom performers, right? They're getting roughly the same value per customer. It's the distinction potentially between the top performers and not is that the top performer is finding different customers. And that customer value is what's structural, and it's a function of who the customer is, and how they exist in a context that has relevance to you and your relevance to them. So when you look at the funnel on the right-hand side, about 6% of the population is switching in any given year, and that's down over the past decade from about 15%. So fewer and fewer customers switching every year. And most banks are seeing maybe 7% consideration among that group. And of the customers who do open, only about 15% are bringing sort of meaningful funded balances. So when you multiply that through, less than 1% of the prospect pool that you're kind of pulling in is really going to drive meaningful deposit growth into your bank. So when we talk about smarter is how do I find more of those 1%? How do I engage that 1% in a more meaningful way that actually fits who they are and what they need so that I'm getting more value? And that's the sort of switch game, is asking, how do I find more of them? And how do I interact with them productively throughout from the prospect stage when I'm just getting to know them all the way through to the save desk. So this is the real opportunity and the challenge at the same time. So I'm gonna jump to the next slide. And obviously being able to understand the customer at a person level, both in the prospect universe as well as your own customer, is the path through. But it's not easy. And I want to start on the next slide with kind of a real example of what we're seeing in the marketplace. And this is an email that landed in the inbox of a colleague of ours. It was from her bank, clearly on behalf of kind of a Land Rover Financial Group offering. And it was sort of telling her that her future Defender ownership is here. Isn't that exciting? Now, the thing about this particular colleague is that she lives in New York City. She takes the subway every day to work. She doesn't own a car. She's never inquired about a car loan with her bank or with anybody else. The bank did use her first name, which in I think a lot of organization counts as knowing you and sort of personalization, but this personalization kind of ignored everything else that this bank knew about, in this case, Olivia. And when she moves through, and as she was sort of describing this to us, she pays for her monthly subway with her debit card. So that's definitely a transaction that shows up in her deposits and register. She pays her monthly rent in Manhattan. She has a whole lot of activity that's showing up in her primary accounts that would indicate zero interest in any kind of automotive purchase. And so it's a missed opportunity on some level, and that's expensive. Because what happens from the customer's perspective is the little mark on the imaginary ledger that we all keep to some extent that does my institution know me, right? Does this institution get me? Yes or no? And, when you misfire in this way, it erodes trust, which you makes somebody more likely to consider optionality, potentially fragment their wallet, et cetera, right? And this is not picking on any single bank. I think that this could have come from any institution. It is, the sort of baseline to some extent. I think the question is where we go from here, because from here we have to get better if we want to have a chance at addressing the sort of real crux of the problem. So if we jump to the next slide, the amazing thing is the amount of richness that banks do have within their four walls, right? The pieces of this understanding and knowing exist in banks today. They just maybe live in different rooms is a way to think about it. And so doing this, we'll call it customer level decisioning, requires three different things to come together at the customer level. And the first is knowing who the customer is. And so on the left-hand side, you can see, right, it's not just on us data and what they hold with you. It's also kind of what we call off us data, the life stage, the demographics, what other banking relationships they have, what they need right now based on how they're using digital environments, what they're sensitive to. The sort of first party data that you have tells you what they've done with you and sort of who they are, and the off you data tells you more about who they actually are. So the second piece that needs to come together, in addition to like, who is this customer? What are their needs? And what kind of value is there in that customer relationship potentially, is what's this bank trying to accomplish here, right? That's the small middle column. It's often an overlooked piece in this equation. Most banks have multiple objectives that are kind of running in parallel. I have a growth objective. I have a primacy objective. I have a retention objective. I have we'll call it a pricing yield objective. And different customers need different objective weights. And, so that's something that we don't necessarily think a lot about necessarily on a customer first level. We think about those things as happening in different silos and making those decisions in different silos. The third piece is, how do I engage this customer, right? What is the right way to interact with this customer in terms of the products that I put in front of them, in terms of the pricing decisions that I make around the incentives and the conditionality I may put around incentives, the channels I engage them in, how my bankers interact with them as well. How frequently, what are the value propositions? All of those things are around meeting what's on the left-hand side with the right library of experiences that sort of drive value, i.e. value for the customer and value for the bank, which is that middle piece, right? And again, these capabilities exist at your bank. The data exists in the world. You have the objectives. They just don't necessarily talk, or the tools that you have for these different pieces of the puzzle don't necessarily talk to each other right now, and they don't necessarily make decisions together. They kind of live in different rooms, run by different people, optimized against different scorecards, and the person sitting in the middle of this decisioning soup is maybe getting not the optimal decision to drive the desired outcome. I.e., if we go back up to the first slides, we were talking about the outcomes that bring balances that are low cost and sticky, that drive primacy. So on the next slide, this is kind of the crux of the shift here, right? As things kind of move into an omni-channel world, and we shift from kind of channels and functional silos that are making decisions that impact the customer towards this omni-channel world where the customer is really at the center of the equation. We need to flip the kind of the operating model, or the decisioning operating model, right? So in the old world, marketing is going to run campaigns that are optimized for cost per acquisition. Pricing is going to deploy kind of rate balance tiers. Product is going to maybe have some offers that are based on tenure or based on kind of signals of primacy. The distribution logic is going to pick branch locations based on the demographics of a particular market. Digital is going to be building more universal journeys for all customers. And each one of those decisions is locally very rational. Every team is doing exactly what their scorecard tells them they need to do. But when you pull back and you think about the sort of customer that's at the heart of all of those locally rationalized decisions, they could be colliding in ways that are less optimal for what you're actually trying to accomplish. And that where we have to get to is where we flip this model and we start with the customer, and we put the customer at the center of the decision-making logic. And that is driven by or rooted in bank level objective function. The customer is at the heart of that, and the functions are sort of organizing and deciding around that customer, not the other way around. And this isn't like a philosophical preference, right? The economics that we were talking about kind of early on do demand that we make this shift, right? When 1% of your prospects are driving your growth equation, digital is eroding your kind of your quality of relationships to some extent. You can't afford to have 5 departments making kind of perfectly locally correct decisions that are maybe not optimal at that 1% level. So with that, I might pass the baton to Ollie and shift to the next slide to talk about where we go from here. How do you do this?
So given how you all answered that first poll, I doubt that you are different to the hundreds of other customers that we've spoken to over the past year or so doing our customer discovery. You see this pattern again and again, and as Sarah sort of talked about it, that there's a paralysis to move in this customer-focused, coordinated way to a single objective function due to gaps on 3 dimensions. Disconnected data. We have the data that serves our function. We do the best things we can with it, but it doesn't connect. We don't have a full view of the customer or of their behavior through the different channels of which we interact with them. We think and have objectives that are siloed to our functions. Not that we're not trying to do the best things, but we really lack coordination between what success looks like for marketing, for our product teams, and in terms of our pricing, which needs to serve both our customers and our treasury. And then even if we get those things right, we don't have connectivity in our platforms to interact with the customers and operationalize our insights and findings, to tie our engagement with the customers together and what we can learn from them. And so it's very typical for you to tell us where we have departments making locally correct decisions, but we know we're destroying our enterprise customer value, despite trying to do the very best in each of our functions with the data we have and the channels through which we can connect with the customers. And the challenge is compounded by the fact, if we hop to the next slide, that the solution here isn't easy to sequence, which is a bit of a trap, which is to say, well, I can solve for my disconnected data, but it's a 2-year out at best CDP project or enterprise data warehouse project for here, and I have problems that are immediate, right? And to the data Sarah shared, they're compounding for me over time in the incrementality of growth performance that I need. My disconnected platforms mean that I can't operationalize an insight quickly enough across the different touches I can have on the customer that I can act in a timely fashion. And my functional siloing means that I might do might do 2 different things to the same customer in response to the same signal. So Sarah has a savings account that's declining, or product might say we're going to serve her a retention offer, and marketing might present a deepening offer, and those 2 things conflict. The question is, how do we efficiently get beyond this paralysis? How can we address all 3 of these things together? Hit the same customer in the same moment. And that's how we came up with our Curinos One decision intelligence platform. But first, we'd love to hear a little bit about this reality from your perspective. And Sarah has another poll question.
I have to come off mute first. As Ollie said, we have talked to a lot of you over the past few years, and I've heard a lot of you talk about these problems, but within your organization, which is the most acute, today? Is your most acute issue siloed data? Is it disconnected platforms? Is it misaligned objectives? There's not necessarily any wrong answer here. Everybody to some degree has combo platter of all 3 of these fabulous things. But I think the question we're curious about is, where's the pain sharpest for you right now? And we can play the Jeopardy music in the background.
We should have given an all for this one too.
True. Yes, we should have.
Really hard.
Disconnected platforms, lack of orchestration and coordination, customer experiences are disjointed. Almost 60% of respondents saying that is the biggest challenge.
I'm not surprised. We see it a lot, and there's a wide degree of variation in the platforms that many of you have. There's not even a lot of consistency across banks at many. So thank you. So moving to the next slide, we want to introduce you today to our Curinos One platform, and it's designed to address this gap we identified between data and customer outcomes. Because many of you already share data with Curinos, there's a light way to get off the ground with our Curinos One decisioning engine. At the heart of it is this synthesis to operate in a closed loop, from data-driven observations that connect your first-party data signals with third-party signals that help you understand the size of a customer's wallet, the breadth of their financial relationships, and to understand comparative performance through our proprietary benchmark data. The purpose of that observation is to identify opportunity and present decisions that you can act on to then operationalize those insights to the business outcomes that you're really chasing. The funny thing is, in our product discovery for Curinos One, No one told us that they needed a set of capabilities around channel X or Y or data insight Z. They told us they had these five distinct business outcomes they were pursuing. What we call capture, acquiring customers efficiently. We've been talking about that with the data today. And that comes together with this ability to compound. How do I grow balances in my current book of business so that I don't have such a challenging acquisition problem? How do I accelerate primacy so customers get the value from the products I have? And how do I retain and deepen that relationship so the value grows over time? And how do I do that in a way that is optimized from a product portfolio perspective, not just for customer response, but also the profitability of the brand? And the key with what we've done with Curinos One is putting that in a closed learning loop where insights are gleaned on each of these business outcomes from taking actions across channels with your customer. So you can synthesize them into your product design, into your audience understanding, but also so they can be automatically leveraged to identify new opportunities that you can then use to decide to act. And the idea is for each of these business outcomes, Curinos One drives continuous improvement. And we do that through four capabilities that I'll summarize on the following slide. And the first is an ability to identify customers for which there's strategic opportunity and alignment with the outcome that you're trying to drive. So you can identify audiences that actually connect to business outcome rather than proxies for that outcome. As we sort of talked about today, customer growth is an imperative, but if I don't grow a high volume of customers that have quality, then my growth challenge, my numerical growth challenge compounds. It's an ability to identify target audience to those downstream outcomes that may well be 1, 3, 6, even 12 months downstream from the targeting and acquisition event. Secondly, and we talked about this just now, this ability to learn. We have unique patented technology in our reinforcement learning engine that allows us to dynamically learn from every customer touch and every outcome. And again, with a downstream view to those outcomes over relatively long periods of time. And thirdly, an agentic AI style execution that transparently exposes its reasoning to you to inform your decision making, and an auditable ability to see the guardrails that you need to have in place for regulatory compliance and to ensure a great customer experience being honored. And then finally, this connection of workflows, both digital and branch channels being able to be orchestrated together, and the workforces behind them, and the marketing, product, and pricing back office workflows that activate through those channels. And the key is delivering this ability to move from customer insight to autonomous action that's continuously improving, but is well governed and solves this orchestration challenge that you all just called out for us. So to give you a quick view of what that looks like, on the next slide, we see the dashboard for Claire, the head of deposits. She's pursuing a deposit balance goal this year. It might be volume driven, but it's really about dollars for her. It's $2.4 billion by the end of this year, and she's past halfway there. She can quickly dynamically see both her current trajectory. She's almost on track to meet the goal, but not quite, and the assessed opportunities that are emerging, and how there's break across opportunities that might be served by different functions in the business. Capture the acquisition opportunity in certain key markets. Compound the balanced growth opportunity among current customers, and conserve how to stop this leaky bucket with my retention team in the back end of my deposits business. There's this dynamic view that connects to opportunities that may need to be operationalized in those different functional silos, but with a common view of the objective. And then on the next slide, drilling into one of those teams, if you think about the team focused on engagement, they can see their progress dynamically. At the top here, there's a robust experimental design in place that provides clear attribution to the decision strategies that are playing out over time and the gap to control customer behavior and baseline performance. And then below, an insight into the autonomous dynamic experience delivery that's adapting across product, offer, channel, and customer as the optimization of the system to this balanced growth, this compound goal is playing out over time. And on the right, you see naturally presented insights on performance benefits and gaps, even perhaps in the experiences that can be offered to a customer and opportunities to continue to improve that inform very human decisions that you can make. I'm going to hand you back to Sarah to talk about some of the dramatic early results we've been getting as we've operationalized Curinos One with our clients.
Thanks, Ollie. And we can jump to the next slide. Get into some of the results. So this is from the sort of acquisition side, what we call capture, and the capture module. And there are 4 things to look at on this slide. The sort of number 1 on the left-hand side starts with prospect quality. So as Ollie was describing, the platform identifies prospects, individuals who have higher expected balances, right, than what organic acquisition channels would deliver. And what we see in our sort of test versus control is, a 1.5 times lift in terms of that, and the 5.5x average balance at the start of the relationship. So the second piece is the response rate. So the treated group responds at 0.05, 0.06%, the control at 0.02%, and an organic acquisition at 0.01%. And when we take a step back, that's like a 200+% lift in response rate over organic. The next is balances. And this is probably the most important number on the slide. So treated customers bring in 54,000 in checking deposits at the origin. So the organic checking acquisition average is 6,000, total deposits ultimately 62,000 against 11,000. So this is a fundamentally different class of customer that's being brought in with the kind of prospecting lens, or I like to think of it, because I liked my Captain Crunch as a little kid, the decoder ring that you get to sort of put over the top of populations to find the ones that are much more likely to be for your bank. Those kinds of different class of customer that are going to bring you those kinds of deposits. And then let's not forget about retention. So again, customers who are targeted and treated through this capability have an 83% retention rate at 120 days, which is certainly on par with the organic and controls. And this is really important in terms of, we're not just bringing hot money into the franchise, but actually sticky customers. So that's on the acquisition side of the equation and some of the outcomes that we're seeing on the acquisition side. On the next slide, we can see some of the impact that we're seeing on the existing customer side. So they've come in. How do you build balances with the customers that you have? So it's the same platform, different use case, and also sort of, an eye-popping ROI. So this is a bank with about 100 billion in assets, and their challenge was, hey, we need to grow deposits as efficiently as possible here. And so how do we grow those deposits within sort of a tightly defined marginal cost of funds? The thing they wanted to obviously stay out of the trap of was the paying up for rate, right? That sort of perennial doom loop of hot money, hot money, hot money. So they deployed Curinos One Compound against three different life cycle programs: deposit augmentation, which was about identifying who are the customers here that really have the capacity to deepen, and how do we engage them to deepen. New account onboarding, how do we treat them differently in that early relationship so that they actually fund their accounts to the level we think is right. And then the sort of hardest one is CD renewal, right? So how do we improve those renewal rates without kind of defaulting to the highest available rate? As we all know, or anybody who's handled CD renewals, they're sort of like chasing a ticking time bomb, right? If I talk to them, am I going to blow this thing up, or will it be okay? And so what this platform did was, for every decision point, it was evaluating the individual customer's behavior, and their particular context, the value potential they brought, and the likelihood of a productive response from an available library of treatments. And then it selected the action, which also included doing nothing, as kind of what is the action that is going to drive the outcome that is our objective function, which is to grow those deposits as efficiently as possible. Important to note, there were no promotional rates, no incentives or special offers in this library, just smarter decisions with generally existing value propositions made at the customer level. And the outcomes were 1.6 billion in new to bank balances, at a very, very low cost of funds for those balances, and a 10x ROI on the overall decisioning platform as well. So on the next slide, just sort of three things we want to leave you with. The first is, we heard at the beginning, right? There's a structural issue, and it's a problem, right? It's a big growth problem. Only 10% of banks are hitting their target on that 3% growth of customers and deposits. CPAs are up, digital is eroding quality, balance attrition is picking up, right? That old playbook is not necessarily going to close the gap. The second piece is, the way out of this is reorienting around the customer, right? And making better decisions across a whole spectrum of possible decisions that are around the customer, not around the product, not around the channel, right? Not around a function, but around the customer, and knowing them well enough to make the right decisions about who to talk to, how to engage them, across the life cycle. And then the third is, Curinos has a platform that is built to sort of close this decision gap that Ollie was talking about, that's at the heart of all of this. And it operates across silos. It leverages your data alongside what I would describe as a wide angle lens on customer behavior across both sides of the balance sheet, and uses your own sort of customer engagement data, trained reinforcement learning to orchestrate at the customer level the right decision. And the results that we walked through are what we are seeing from this platform in action out in the marketplace. So if you take away nothing else from our conversation today, it's honestly, you don't have to fix the data problem first. You don't have to wait for perfect platform consolidation. You can start closing the decision gap now, against a single objective like growing balances, on sort of the part of the equation that matters most to you, whether that's new households or existing customers. And that's really the shift and the opportunity. So with that, I think we've left some time for Q&A. So feel free to drop them in the Q&A panel, and we'll get through as many as we can here. All right. We had one question that I think got answered earlier, which had to do with when we say optimize the portfolio, what do we mean there? Is it mathematical? What's happening under the hood? And then this seems like a follow-up question to that. So Ollie, do you want to handle both of those questions for folks?
Yes. So when we say optimization, we do mean mathematical optimization, a combination of optimization solving based on a granular modeling of underlying elasticity of the customer behavior in response to your products historically. And then the follow-on question, does the user have the ability to edit or customize models on the platform? Are there guardrails in place to prevent going rogue? Yes. So we've believed that you need to be able to set rules and hard constraints for how models behave, be able to transparently see that those guardrails and hard constraints are observed for every decision opportunity that's assessed, understand all of the experiences or actions that were considered, that each of them met the constraints, and then why any given one was chosen. And so there is no opportunity to go rogue because any decision that can be taken must observe a set of rule-based constraints in how we've designed it. Good question.
All right. I don't see any more questions. So just wanted to say thank you for everybody who attended, and feel free to reach out with any additional questions.
Thank
Thanks
you
so
all.
much,
Thank you for your
Sarah.
insights.
Appreciate you guys joining us today. And thank you to everyone who took time out of their day to come listen to our great sponsors at Curinos. With that, this has been recorded and will be available within 1 to 2 business days. If you have any questions, you all have my email address. And if you want me to connect you guys with Sarah or Ollie, just let me know and I will make sure that happens. Again, thank you everyone and have a great day.
Thanks all.